Hi. Are we the only two on?
I think we're early.
Oh, happy Tuesday. I'm always early.
Yeah. I'm usually not to these, actually. I'm usually one of the last because I'm coming off of another one, but
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure I could find the link tonight.
Yeah. I always like to be prepared in advance because, I have to make sure I can reach my thing to take minutes and whatnot.
I hear you.
Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed the lovely weather today.
Oh, yeah. I didn't really get outside today, but how was AP testing this afternoon? Do you know? Did you hear anything?
Well, I don't think there were as many issues today. I know that the first two exams yesterday, physics, they had a lot of problems with. AP Gov, they had some issues, but not as badly as they did with the physics. I think today was somewhat better. I haven't had a chance to fully check. Ryan took a 2 o'clock. He took BC Calc. And he basically said there was not even close to enough time to answer all the questions that were given to them. But, it's what it is. I said, you know what? You're going to get between a 1 and a 5, and you studied and you did the work necessary, and you're going to do what you're going to do. I said, I'm proud of you no matter what you do. This is an unusual situation. So,
And AP tests are often like that anyway. And I would imagine online, it's so unknown just because they've never seen it before.
Well, because they moved them to being 50-minute tests, and after each response, they have originally it was supposed to be only 2 questions that they would have a limited amount of time, obviously, like they normally do to answer, and then a 5-minute window with which to upload each response. And kids' things were crashing at the first response, so they couldn't even get to the second response. They were getting kicked out yesterday. And you can't re-enter once you've started the test. So it was like 1,001 little problems yesterday. So I was like, look, you're going to do what you're going to do. I mean, he didn't have a problem with AP Gov. So
good.
That helped with the stress of today's. But from what I've heard from most of the kids here, that they weren't having issues today.
Oh, good. Well, I was reading the stream from the weekend, and it was all over the world. And I was shocked that some of the students were literally testing at midnight, 1 a.m. because it was online, and they had to fit into East Coast, West Coast, but the timing was just so bizarre.
Well, and what they had told the kids originally was that for each exam, there would be 2 questions. Physics yesterday had 3 for some of the tests. They had told them they were being given the same exam, but afterwards they all had, discussed things. They weren't yesterday for AP Gov given all the same answers. Today for Calc, I know the kids had the same questions, but different numbers, so they couldn't cheat, which is smart.
Yeah.
And things like that. I mean, that's just the feedback that I've gotten so far.
Wow. Well, I'm glad
it's very interesting.
I'm glad it was better.
Yeah. I mean, it's a new format for them, so fun times for all, I guess. But I think the kids were, stressed yesterday, but hopefully the College Board will address that for them.
Yeah.
But, all righty.
Looks like we're waiting for a few more.
Hey, Tony, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, good. Hey, guys, everyone. This is Ryan with Lang. I'm sorry my video is not going to be working today, but I'm here audio.
Oh, great. Thanks, Ryan. It's hard going back and forth from Zoom to Meet, so you try to do your mute in the different spot.
If that's the biggest problem of the day, not bad.
No kidding. That is so true.
All right, I see 5 board members at 7. We'll give it a couple more minutes. All right, we have two more people we're waiting on. We'll give it another minute. I think now that everybody's home, this is conflicting with dinner time. All right, folks, we're almost at critical mass. Hopefully we'll get everybody on in a second. I know we've got 52 attendees from our loyal following. Thank you to everybody who's dialed in, especially those that don't work for us. All right, I see we've got 7. I think we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to call this meeting to order of the Board of Education. That's a special meeting. We could please do the Pledge of Allegiance and rise. Michael, do you have a flag for us? All right, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, so I guess I should announce myself. Hi, I'm Peter Bernstein, Chair of the Board of Ed. Thank you for joining what is, I don't know, our 5th virtual meeting. This has become the norm for us and most of the other public boards in town. Before we start, I'll go over our usual ground rules. So the meeting's being conducted over Zoom, pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order 7B. Per that order, we're recording the meeting. Feel free to watch it again on our webpage or our YouTube channel. The agenda for the meeting is found on our Board Docs website, and you can get there via the Greenwich Public School site, clicking on the Board of Ed and meetings, and you'll navigate to Board Docs. It's a special meeting, so there's no public comment, but anybody that wishes to reach out to the board and provide any comments could send an email to all of the Board of Ed members via a single email address, and that is boardofedmembers@greenwich.k12.ct.us. The meeting tonight is going to be a discussion amongst the Board of Education, the superintendent, her cabinet, and we've got an external consultant on for one of the items. I would ask that everybody stay muted when they're not speaking. I would also ask that the participants state their name every time they speak. That's part of the governor's order. We're going to use the raise the hand function, and I'll see that in the order you raise your hand, and I'll call all members in turn. I'd ask the board members to keep their comments concise, and for any voting, we'll be doing that via roll call. So with that, the first item on our agenda is the approval of, the next item on our agenda is the approval of the meeting agenda. Just to make this easy, I'm going to move that we approve the meeting agenda. Is there a second?
No, I'm Karen Hirsch. I'll second.
Great, thank you. All right, not seeing any discussion. We'll take a roll call vote on the meeting agenda. Peter Bernstein's a yes. Ms. Stowe?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Ms. Downey?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. Kowalski?
Yes.
Ms. Olson, if you're on. I don't see her on. And Mr. Scher?
Yes.
Mr. Scher's a yes. Thank you. So that's 7-0. Thank you very much. So the first item to take up is the action item. It's the last day of school and GHS graduation. So Dr. Jones, if you want to introduce it, and then we'll take a motion on that.
Sure. This is just to end the school year. Now that the governor did close our school facility for the rest of the year, we were able to set our ending date, knowing what our schedule looks like. So our calendar has us ending on our 180th day on June 12th. And I would just like to comment for the public. I had 2 questions over the weekend. The first question from community, the first question was, oh my goodness, why are you making us go that long? I thought they waived the 180 days. And then the second question was, oh my goodness, why can't we go longer to the end of June? And it really was both of those. And the 180-day waiver applies to those school districts that did not get distance learning started, some of them for 3 or 4 weeks. So if you went all the way to June 30th, and you had only done 175 days, it's okay for those districts. But for those of us that started immediately, we are held to the 180th day. Our teacher contract is 187, so we're doing contractually what we're supposed to. And again, that ends us on June 12th. And our graduation date, there are 2 dates on the calendar as 9th and 10th. And that is because we know graduation may have to look a little bit differently this year, and the number of students that we have graduating in a more unconventional way could take longer. And I just want to commend Headmaster Mayo and his staff. They're working really hard to be responsive to the community over the last couple of days to see if there is a way to be able to do it in one day, again, given just the volume of students, but they're really working on that. And Mr. Mayo is on with us tonight, so if you do have any comments about that, I'm sure he's happy to help you. But we're excited to at least know that, to have our calendar set. I think that was a relief for a lot of people. Thank you.
All right, before we get into discussion, can we get a motion to approve the calendar as amended?
So moved.
All right, Ms. Downey and Ms. Stowe, I think I saw your hand up. Did you want to be the second on that?
Yes.
Great. All right, discussion on the calendar. I'm looking for hands, folks. All right, Tony, if I could just ask about graduation. I know the governor has said that he's going to put out some guidance on graduation. Do we have any sense of when that might come? I know there are people that would like some idea of the plans.
I'm really hoping this week, but I feel like I've said that every week the last few weeks. We do have a commissioner's call and a governor's call over the next 3 days. So I am hoping that guidance will come out, but it has not as of yet. We can kind of look at the summer camp guidance and some things they're putting out, which has signaled to us that they are, while there may be some lifted restrictions, it would not be such that a graduation with 700 students, we were not close to that at all. So we're awaiting his guidance and feel like the plan that we have, we know we could do tomorrow. And again, the credit to Mr. Mayo and his staff. They really have kind of 2 simultaneous plans according to what the governor puts out.
Great, thank you. Ms. Hirsch.
Hi, Tony. I know I had reached out earlier, but I just wanted to confirm, and especially for those who are listening, to make sure, especially if we have dates on here for rain dates, that there won't be overlapping between the high school, middle, and elementary if parents have multiple students that are moving up on the same year. So if there's a rain date, is that a, or do
Right.
we have, they're all rain dates?
Right now we have for high school graduation, we have the 9th and the 10th, but where we're sitting as of today, we do believe it can be done in one day, which would make the 10th a rain date. But keep in mind, even for high school, rain dates look different because at GHS that you used to mean you could move inside, you can't do that anymore. So even if it's a little bit rainy, we may still have to go on the 9th because even if you rent a stage and things of that nature, you can't really hold the vendors for 2 days. So working through some challenges like that. So the intent is high school on the 9th, middle school celebration for 8th grade on the 11th, and our elementaries are on the last day on the 12th.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Downey.
Ms. Hirsch beat me to the punch. I had the same question. So otherwise, all good.
All right, Mr. Scher.
Tony, for the public, could you explain what the 2 plans are?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Mayo on that, in that I know he still has 2 pieces in the works. One is, well, Mr. Mayo, you go ahead because I want a message in the way that you've been talking to your PTA and sharing with your community.
Okay. As Tony said, we have developed 2 plans. but one of those plans is going to be based on the governor's guidance if we ever get that. One plan, the first plan, or Plan A, was to graduate one house at a time in Cardinal Field, keeping the students, separate from one another, 6 feet apart, as it were, having students come up to the stage, receive a diploma, and then move back to their seat. And then we would do the second house, third house, fourth house, fifth house. But in between all that, we would be cleaning the chairs and everything in the bathroom so that we're not spreading anything. And we haven't even discussed whether we were going to ask the students to wear masks or not to that celebration. So that's Plan 1. It's if we can put, there's 144 kids that are graduating per house. If we can put all those kids plus 2 of their parents in the stadium together, that would be our preferred plan, because everybody would like to graduate in a live audience. But that might not happen, and I'm fairly doubtful. I'm doubtful that it will happen. Our next plan was to graduate by house, but have them come into the high school in cars, by family, come around to their front entrance, get out of their cars, again, walk across the podium in their cap and gown, receive their diploma, and then have their picture taken by a professional photographer. So those are our 2 plans. One's by car, and plus there's a virtual part of that ceremony where we would all have well, not all of us, but some of us would have a speaking role, and there would also be music from our choir and stuff like that. And the other is live in the stadium. I'm very scared about doing anything live in the stadium with, let's say, 150, then with almost 400 or 500 kids, not kids, but people in the stadium. My daughter works as a nurse in Greenwich Hospital, and the stories that she's coming home with are scary and they're horrible, and I don't think we want to put the community in that place. But we will wait for the governor to give us some more guidance on that. I think the graduation with the families coming in the cars and going through the front circle, we've worked all that out. It'll work, and I think that'll be the safest way for us to conduct a ceremony at this point in time.
Ralph, have you surveyed parents?
We've talked to the PTA. We've talked to the student government. We talked to the senior class officers. We talked to the staff. Peter, the problem with the survey is everybody wants to graduate together.
No, I get, Ralph, I get that part. Look, I think we're going to make the decision, whether the community likes it or not. That's our responsibility. But at the same time, it would be interesting to know what the views of the parents are. I would just like to know. I'm surprised the PTA didn't, do a survey monkey or something just to find out what's on people's minds. At the meantime, candidly, I never, I think lots of people in Greenwich never care what Hartford thinks, other than we need to comply. So it'll be interesting to hear what the governor, but we've always made decisions down here that have been the best for our community based upon our community. I agree with you, I feel really badly for these kids. I've had 2 kids who graduated, this poor bunch of kids, they're just missing out on an unbelievable number of things. But at the same time, that'll be temporary in their lives compared to the potential impact of this devastating virus. So, if we need to make hard decisions, we need to make hard decisions. I'm just curious.
Peter, I could agree with you
curious
more.
If you know anything about the temperature of the parents of these children, but I guess not.
I couldn't agree with you more, Peter, that we're going to have to make hard decisions, and these kids are losing out on probably one of the most beautiful ceremonies they're ever going to be involved in, because it is a beautiful ceremony. But it's not worth risking their lives for a ceremony. It's just not. And to push something off to July and August, which is some of the comments I've been getting, it's not worth it. It's not going to happen in July. It's not going to happen in August. We're going to be in the same situation we're in right now. If all the science says that there might be a vaccine for the fall, but who knows? But the summer is just pushing it back is just not something that we want to do. And I think the seniors that I've spoken to and student government, they'd like to push it back, but they'd also like to get on with their lives and start thinking about post-secondary plans.
Yeah, I'm wondering.
Peter, we've got other people with their hands up, so if we can come back
I'm
to
sorry,
you.
I have a follow-up question for Ralph Mayo, Peter.
This
Ralph,
is your third follow-up question, Peter.
Ralph, have you considered, did you take into consideration doing this next year?
Double graduation next year? No, or maybe in December? No, we haven't considered that, but none of that is off the table. Once things become safe for us to bring large groups together, we could do anything we want. We just have to make sure that the kids that we bring back, we have the liability insurance to bring students back on campus that have already graduated from our public high school. So other than that, yeah, we're open to any kind of celebration that we could possibly have once it's safe to bring large crowds together.
Ms. Stowe.
Hey, Ralph, thanks so much for going through all these iterations of plans. And I just wanted to say the one thing is, obviously, I'm so sorry for the kids and for their families, but I love that you found 2 scenarios that are on the campus, because I think there's probably something really special to the children, at least that, whether in either scenario, that it's actually, in their home base. So, because I know there are probably some other options thought about doing it off campus and maybe a bigger space, but I like this. So thank you.
Well, Kathleen, you're welcome. Kathleen, we did think about moving the ceremony to 2 different sites, but you're right. The majority of people that I've talked to anyway, want to graduate on Greenwich High School's campus. So, we can do that. So that's the least we can do.
I guess I'll echo the thanks. I think you're basically building options, and we'll see what the governor allows us as a possibility. The longer we can wait, the better. But I think a lot of people just want to know what the plan's going to be, and we're all anxiously waiting to hear from you. The community is. So, all right. With that, I don't see any other hands. So the motion on the table is to approve the calendar as amended. So I'm going to take a roll call vote. Peter Bernstein is a yes. Ms. Stowe?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Ms. Downey?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. Olson? Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Kowalski.
Yes.
Ms. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Scher? Peter, I think you're muted.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, that passes 8-0. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is a discussion item. This is a revisit of the Western Middle School fields. Just to set the stage, the state DEEP has approved the work for fields 6 and 7. That work is now going to be ongoing. With that, we are ready to continue our discussion and possibly move forward with a plan for Western. I'll turn it over to Dr. Jones, and you can introduce the rest of it.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. We do have Ryan Wolstrom here from Langen tonight. And just as a reminder, we've had Western, I think, on the agenda twice in just the last few months. And to move forward with the voluntary application, which we have done. This is now moving to that next step in that how are we going to remediate the field? And so Ryan is here tonight to start the conversation because he needs the board to weigh in on what that top surface will be, whether it will be turf or grass, because as you remember, that impacts the remediation plan. So Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. And again, yeah, Ryan Wilstrom with Langen Engineering. I can provide an update where we stand with the voluntary remediation program. We submitted the environmental condition assessment form with the acronym ECAF to the state DEP on April 24th. Typically, in a world without COVID, the state will respond to that submission in about 30 days. It's only been about 15, 18 days or so. I did reach out to the project manager, Jeff Wilcox. I left him a voicemail on Monday. I have not heard back from him, trying to understand from those guys how long we can expect it's going to take them given the current situation of COVID. So to be determined, but we are hopeful to hear back from them, get an acknowledgement on the ECAF in the near term. Once we get that acknowledgement of the ECAF and we're formally enrolled in the voluntary remediation program, the next big task for Langen and the state is to meet and to agree on some sort of roadmap for the project, with the idea of trying to remediate these fields as soon as we can. As a reminder, the main approach here is to move forward with remediating the athletic fields while simultaneously assessing the rest of the school site. We are hopeful that the rest of the school site is going to be a non-issue from a investigation remediation perspective, but that is yet to be seen, and that will be determined based on our conversations with the state. As Tony indicated, one decision we are looking to obtain from the town at this point is the plans for final restoration of those fields. The decision of whether or not to restore with grass or artificial turf does have an impact on the remediation planning. And not only remediation planning, the other site civil and engineering and surveying design is a pretty big effort. And undertaking that effort without that decision being made could end up being a lot of money. You're gonna, once the decision does get made, let's say you want to go forward with artificial turf, you need to do full surveys, site civil engineering design and drainage, start looking at conceptual planning, what do you want for bleachers and lights, access ways, walkways, and those sort of things. So getting that decision in the near term is going to be helpful in kind of moving this forward. Tony, did you want me to provide a brief overview of those high-level costs we put together, comparing the two, grass versus artificial?
Yes, please. And if Mr. Antonaccio can help bring it up on the screen, that would be great.
So as that's coming up, I'll set the stage. Last time, or maybe the second to last time I spoke here, I reviewed several of the remedial alternatives we've been evaluating over the past year or so. We are hopeful that now that the state has approved a partial remedy for the high school that consists of a 1-foot excavation under artificial turf and a 2-foot excavation for areas where there's grass, that we're hopeful that that sort of remedial strategy and approval is going to be something we can look forward to on the Western Middle School. So with that in mind, we compared those two main approaches from the perspective of grass versus artificial turf. So if you look on the left side of this slide, assuming restoring to grass, we're contemplating a 2-foot cut across the site with a total remediation and restoration cost of $10.5 million. If we assume that artificial turf is going to be the final restoration, you're minimizing the cut to only 1 foot, which drastically reduces the amount of soil that's got to leave the site, which in turn drops your remediation cost from 10 million to 6.5 million. Therefore, the increased cost for installing an artificial turf field is overseen by the fact that you're saving months on remediation. So your $10.5 million for a grass remediation approach is about $1.8 million more than a remedial approach that involves artificial turf. And that's kind of my high-level summary of where we stand right now. I'm happy to answer any questions if the board has any.
Mr. Scher.
Ryan, could you please go over the 4 options again? I think they're further back in your deck. You originally presented 3 or 4 option stuff.
Yeah, you probably got to go down.
And you also presented kind of the regulatory hurdles on each of them.
So what we had evaluated were 5. I mean, I'm trying to get to the slides as he's go jump to slide. 27. So you got about 10 more slides.
Just for the people that are attending and maybe are dialed in by their phones, the documents are available on our board docs website under tonight's meeting if you're interested.
Let's do this actually, Mike. Go to slide 46. That presents a summary of all of them. So we have to go through them all individually. So these are the 6 alternatives. Each alternative is briefly explained in the upper 2 rows, alternative 1 being complete removal, down to alternative 6, which is the least comprehensive alternative, which is only a 1-foot cut. And then on the left side, we have our evaluation criteria with cost estimates in bold on the third to last from the below. So each one of these alternatives, starting with number 1, gets less and less expensive as we do a less robust remediation effort. Each one of these alternatives, Peter, starting with number 2, would require some sort of variance from either the state or the EPA or both, other than number 1, which is a complete removal.
Right, but I think the reason I found this chart a little confusing is it says compliance with applicable regulations, and it's yeses all the way across. But that's not really true, right? Each one of these requires a variance, an approved variance to applicable regulations, correct?
That's right. Number 1 is really the only one that should say yes. The remainder, in reality, could say yes with variances.
And
2
then
through 6.
you went through at one point the variances of each one of these and the scope of the variance, right?
Yes. On the above slides for each alternatives, there's a summary slide generally presenting the variances we would need to request from the state and the EPA.
And we just got a variance for, a variance is probably the wrong term. The theory of action here was that we would get a particular type of variance for Greenwich High School. I think the argument you made at the time is the situations are nearly identical, which I'm not sure that's true, but and therefore the theory was if once we get this variance at the high school, it would be a precedent to get the same variance.
I would not say that the 2 sites are identical. They're actually quite different. However, from the perspective of a soil remediation and an approved variance to the engineering control, which is the CAP, we're hopeful that they will be similar and the state will see it that way. So the high school, again, that's not on our project, but they just got the variance request approved by the state.
All right, Ms. Hirsch.
I actually have more than one question. One is a tag off on what you were just saying. I know that we are hopeful that we're going to get a similar variance for Western. Have you sussed that out, that if we make a decision and that it would be more likely that they would give us a similar variance?
That would be a discussion. We would need to sit down or maybe webinar with the state and EPA once we're enrolled into the voluntary remediation program, and we can hash that out with the regulators who will be making those decisions. So
Okay.
have we gotten a formal answer on that? The answer is no.
Okay, and then I have two other quick questions. One is I assume that the cost for drainage is included in the price for all of them for natural grass and artificial turf in there? Because
Yeah.
there has to be drainage no matter what we do, right?
They are lumped in, and it's important to note that we're consultants and engineers. Considering the preliminary stage of this estimating stage, these would need to be truth once you're talking to contractors and designers to really focus on those remedial estimates. That's why you see such a large spread in the ranges for each alternative. So keeping in mind that it's baked into each of these estimates, we did incorporate the design and installation of drainage elements.
Okay. And I know you went over this the past 2 times that we've spoken about it, but Western, our students there have been without a field for several years. This, we figured out, I think from discussions last time, that the options to put in turf would be certainly the ones that would get the fields back up and running for the students as soon as possible. Is that correct? Can you give us an idea of how long it would take to remediate based on each plan?
So each one of the alternatives does have a short-term effectiveness row. The middle row does have an approximate number of days for construction. Note that each one of these is assuming a grass restoration, while a artificial turf installation would add on to those construction days because the installation of turf is a more comprehensive and robust construction element. You would still, I don't want to say it's going to be quicker to do artificial turf. I would say that the major benefits of doing artificial turf are a reduction in cost, and the state has indicated, based on our knowledge of the high school, that they feel it's a more protective barrier between the underlying impacted fill and the students. So I think those are the 2 primary benefits of going with a turf. Because you're doing a 1-foot cut for the turf, you're going to see a drastic reduction in days for the off-site excavation and disposal of the impacted fill. So from that perspective, it's going to be less days. But if you're doing a 1-foot cut with turf and a 1-foot cut with grass, the turf would take longer.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
All right, Ms. Downey.
Hi, a couple of just kind of questions. You have the grass versus turf, overview earlier that you pointed to, but these numbers don't jive with those, or was that just kind of an old illustration of grass versus turf? And now this is really getting into the details. Could you explain that?
Yeah, so the one slide that shows a general overview is alternative number 3, which was 8.5 to 12.5 million on here, and we showed 10.5 on the slide. So we just took the middle number, and rather than showing ranges.
Okay, so you were just doing that as just kind of an illustration, not that it was anything specific. Okay, so I guess the next question is you have these recommendations, and later in the deck, you say number 5 is the preferred alternative, correct?
Yes. Number 5 would be a version of restoring to artificial turf, because the number 5 is the alternative that involves a 1-foot cut. Yeah, so when this slide deck that you're seeing here is what we presented to EPA and the state last year. So we kind of repurposed it for the meeting with you guys. The 6 alternatives that we evaluated were evaluated at their request, and that's why we had a potential selection or a recommendation in that slide deck. It essentially is going to be kind of a version of several of these at this point, if the artificial turf is going to be the ultimate restoration strategy selected.
What do you mean by like a mix of several versions? Could you explain that?
Yes. So if you're looking at the slide right now, remedial alternative number 5 has removed fill to 1 foot plus the removal of PCBs above 10 ppm, which is parts per million. If we're assuming that we'll see a similar approval as the high school saw for the Western Middle School, the high school is not being asked to chase PCBs at depth if it's below a certain level. Therefore, number 5, the way it reads right now, would actually not happen the way it's explained. It would just be a remove to 1 foot all across the site, plus the installation of turf. So you're going to see a cost savings by not having to chase PCBs above 10 ppm. However, you're going to have added costs for the installation of the turf, which this slide does not show those costs. So that's why it's going to be a mix and a match.
So the 5.7 to 8 in that column does not reflect the adding of the artificial turf, or it does?
That's correct.
Or that's
all the alternatives you see on this slide are restoration to grass. Artificial turf,
so
essentially you're adding maybe $2 to $2.5 million.
okay. So potentially, if you said remedial, so what is really the difference between 5 and 6 then, other than if under your scenario that we get approval like we do at the high school? Because if it doesn't matter which PCBs level we're looking at.
There wouldn't
really
be a
isn't.
difference between 5
Okay.
and 6 if we're not being, if
Okay.
the state or EPA is not going to ask us to chase PCBs at depth.
Okay.
So
Okay.
so Western Middle School in several areas at 10 feet below grade surface, we have elevated PCBs. In reality, those PCBs at that kind of depth has very realistic chance of having any exposure risk to students. So we're going to make the argument that we don't have to chase those. The high school was successful in doing that for the portion of their fields.
Okay, great. And then, thank you. And then I guess the process in terms of how much detail do we need to use in our decision? Or we just say grass versus turf when we go to the state, and then they'll give us the requirements that we have to comply with. How does that work?
In the immediate term, just the decision for grass or turf is kind of all we need. As we move forward, the town will need to provide guidance to us with our consultation of some decisions to be made about specifics, where you want bleachers, where you need signs or lighting, access ramps, sidewalks, those sort of things. But from a direct impact on what the state is going to be interested, that decision is for the primary one, grass or turf.
So when we go in, like at whatever meeting we vote on this, we simply have to vote on, are we doing grass or turf, using this information to make our decision. And then, because we're really not making a decision until we get the approval anyway, in terms of all those things like lights and bleachers, et cetera.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Kowalski.
Thanks, Peter. So my question goes to the concept of, well, I have a couple questions, but the significant reduction of risk, right? You've got greatest reduction you see for remedial alternative number 1, and then the rest of them are all determined as significant reduction of risk. Is there a difference in the reduction of risk whether you're cleaning up 2 feet versus 4 feet and then capping it?
There is a difference in the reduction of risk. I mean, if you actually calculate a human health risk assessment and you determine what the cancer slope factors are, I mean, maybe there's a decimal place and that's going to be adjusted for each one. However, with the reason why we say significant reduction of risk for each one is that the removal of even the most minimalistic alternative, which is number 6, a 1 foot cut plus a cap, the argument we're making is that there is very little chance for any potential exposure for students to come in contact with that fill. That's why it's a significant reduction in risk. You're going to have 1 foot of clean minimum. You have stone layer, and then you have a geogrid plus the turf or astroturf or astrograss. So that sort of protective barrier is why we make that determination for a significant reduction in risk.
Okay, so you said the argument we would make. You're not saying that's the argument you make. You're saying that we know that. We know that there would be a layer. Okay. And then the other question, one of the other questions I have is, we keep talking about getting a variance, and I know we got the variance with respect to the high school, and obviously there's an age difference between the kids in high school versus the kids in middle school, and I'm wondering if that variance depends upon the age difference of children that are on the field. I recognize that we use the high school field on the weekends for all kinds of other Pee-wee sports, but what I'm curious is, do they look at those variances for the different age groups that are on that are using those fields on a regular basis?
It's a good question. So I'm actually not a toxicologist, but I have some involvement. So when a toxicologist or a risk assessor does their human health risk assessments, one of the parts of the equations is the weight of the students being potentially exposed. So that number does get incorporated into the risk assessment. But that being said, the reduction in risk that's prevalent based on a 1 foot cut and a cap, regardless of the potential exposure students, the risk is still minimal.
Okay.
Hope that answers your question.
I think so. If I can translate for a moment, I think what you're saying is that irrespective of the age or the weight of the child that's playing on the field, the 1 foot cut and the cap would give the necessary reduction in risk, whether the child weighs 100 pounds or 175 pounds.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. There's some members that haven't spoken yet. We'll go with them and then we'll circle back to the ones who have. Ms. Stowe.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan, for coming again. A few quick questions. I think it's clear, but you always want to double check, is that for investigating the rest of the area, those are not built into these current numbers. Is that fair?
That's fair. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Do we have a sense for how much that might cost?
Best case, it's zero. I mean, so we're doing a phase 1 environmental site assessment for the rest of the school as we speak. We're not seeing a whole lot from a potential recognized environmental conditions perspective or areas of concern. There was an underground storage tank that was removed last year, but it was removed in accordance with the Connecticut state regulations and samples were collected. Once we're in the voluntary remediation program, one of the requirements of that program is to investigate all areas of concern, or AOCs as the state tags them, and remediate any such impacts that we find. So there's a chance that there's something hidden beneath the ground that we'll find as part of that assessment. But as of right now, it's difficult to really opine until we kind of move forward with that assessment a little further.
Okay, well, let's hope for once we get lucky. The other thing I was going to say is it looks like our 8.5 million number that we put forth, guys, to the BET was pretty darn close if we went with this artificial turf, but it's sort of a moot point, but I still think that's pretty cool that we were close to our estimate. Quick question to Tony. Are you guys, is Dan, is Gordon, is anyone weighing in on this or giving us any thoughts, Tony?
I think that from the staff perspective, we feel like turf is the way that the school community in general has been vocal, for those that have been vocal about. But we also, and Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we remove less soil, it also means that that portion of the soil remover will go faster. And we've been without our field for quite a while. The other thing is that when we get turf, it's going to be pretty much usable very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. So I think we are overwhelmingly, I know from facilities, from the principal's perspective, a vast majority of those that we've heard from, it would be the turf option because we think it's best.
Yeah, it would be less time to actually do the remedy because you're just talking about trucking off the soil and bringing in clean. So you're gonna cut 30 days or so by that additional foot or removing additional foot of cut. And then you don't have a growing season for grass or for turf. So it's also a time savings.
Great, thank you. Thanks to both of you.
So Ryan, this is Peter Bernstein. I have a couple of questions. I know you're asking us basically grass versus turf, but given the layout of Western, there's basically 3 field areas. The field closest to the school, and then kind of it goes up from there. Wondering if we could even consider a hybrid model, maybe closer to the school, a grass field, and then the 2 larger sort of multi-purpose spaces, turf. Is that something that you explored at all?
We haven't explored it, but so when you say the first field, you're talking about the area next to like the parking area on the lower elevation?
You could do that, or you could do basically right behind the school building. So beyond the parking, more to the, I guess, right if you were looking at the map.
All right, so the lower fields, the lower elevation, on the bottom of that slope, that area doesn't have impacted fill beneath it. So we're not proposing to remediate that area. So that can either stay as it is, or you can strip the topsoil and, design and install turf down there. That's going to be added costs. But to answer your question, yeah, we can definitely look at a hybrid of both, and only using AstroTurf where we need to do remediation, and we can leave grass where we don't need to remove contaminated fill.
Okay. The second question for you was, does this anticipate and seeking approvals for trenches for electrical or sound system or footings for lights? I would presume that has to be baked into whatever plan we go to the state with. So have you already started thinking about that?
So the state wouldn't really need to know those details, but yeah, between Langen and the school and the board, those decisions would need to be hashed out, and you have to bring in engineering. You probably want to do a full survey of the site to understand where all your utilities are. We have a general understanding based on our knowledge, but there has not been a full survey done. So that would be one of the first steps you'd want to do if you want to go with turf.
I guess, Tony, that's my hint. That maybe we ought to move forward with that, just so we're positioned to make those decisions. All right, Mr. Chair.
Ryan, I guess I realize, you guys sounds like you and the administration are just talking about this like a project, and then just want us to make one decision so you can kind of hurdle down this path. I'm not there yet. I guess I'm back on the remediation part, because I'm really concerned most about student safety and student health. That's at the top of my hit parade. So the proposals you talked about are 3 and 5, right? And it says one is to take out 2 feet of dirt, right? The other one's to take out 1 feet of dirt. But then it says plus the PCBs to 10 parts per million. I'm trying to visualize that in my head, because I think when you presented, there were PCBs throughout the entire layers. They're not just sitting at the top. So how does that work?
So each one of these remedial strategies, Peter, would involve leaving impacted material in place under an engineering control.
Okay, but please take out the engineering gobbledygook of that.
The cap, your turf.
PCBs on the site in the dirt, correct? There's also arsenic and lead, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So can we, I mean, see, I've been around too long. I remember how this whole damn thing got started, and it was over putting a school and trailers in a part we're not even talking about, which at the time had one of the highest concentrations of not PCBs, but lead and arsenic. And that's how this whole thing then, it snowballed into, oh my God, now we have to look at the whole site. So I'm really interested in a plan, not that is the cheapest just to cap, to get fields for kids to play on. I'm interested in a plan that is getting toxic materials off the site everywhere. So I'm having a little trouble evaluating how this has jumped to kind of the lowest cost option, just the playing fields. And it seems like I kind of lost the plot on the remediating Western. I think what parents really care about is not just the safe playing field, but a safe school site. So I'm a little lost in this conversation now.
So none of the remedial alternatives, Peter, involve leaving contaminated material at the surface. If that was expressed in any of these, I'm sorry for the confusion.
Yeah, but
we're talking about leaving things in place at depth.
But didn't you just say a minute ago that space down by the parking lot below the slope, we're not going to do anything?
That's correct. The samples that we've collected in that area don't represent a concern. You're referring to the initial sampling that was done in that area where there was a couple of topsoil samples. There were some elevated pesticides and an elevated level of arsenic. While they were elevated, they actually weren't the driver for when this thing actually took off and became a remediation project. It was when we started sampling the fill beneath the topsoil where we found the impacted PCBs. That said, so why I say that, Peter, is the fill beneath the topsoil in that lower field is not contaminated with PCBs or heavy metals. There is some areas of topsoil that may be warranted to strip as part of this remediation effort, but there's not going to be a large scale or a site-wide remediation effort on that lower fields. We've taken upwards of 35 samples in that lower field area, and all but a couple were clean. And the exception of the ones that aren't clean, while they are above standards, those things are easy remediated as part of this remediation effort. It's not going to be a site-wide or an area-wide cleanup.
Okay, and then can you go back to how you take the PCBs out through the whole site, through all the layers to get it below 10 parts per million?
So for only alternative that involves removing all impacted fill, including the PCBs, is alternative number 1. Alternative number 1 means regardless of depth, we're chasing it down to the 10, 11, 12 feet below grade surface and removing all that fill off the site. That's why you see the highest remediation cost estimate, $17.3 to $24.5 million. While that is technically the most protective because you are removing all your contaminants of concern, it's also not a realistic or practical approach because the impacted material at 12 feet below grade surface has no real practical method of being exposed to students. Therefore, we also proposed alternatives that involve less and less cuts, so 4 feet to 2 feet to 1 foot. Each one of those alternatives, per the request of the state and EPA, they also asked us to cost what it would take to, in addition to those site-wide cuts, what would it cost for you to chase impacts, the higher level PCBs at depth. So for example, alternative number 2, you're doing a site-wide, where we have impacted material, you're removing all of it to 4 feet. In addition to that, let's say you have a 15 parts per million at 6 feet, we're also chasing that. So that's the additional plus PCBs above 10 ppm.
So 2, 3, and 4, 2, 3, and 5 will all be the same, right? So there's really 3 alternatives here, right? Take it all away, which is number 1. 2, 3, and 5 are variations on a theme, right?
Well, 2 is a 4 foot cut. 3 and 4 are 2 foot, and 5 and 6 are 1 foot. So yeah.
And then the other one is 4 and 6, which is a variation on a theme, but the central thing is you're leaving PCBs greater than 50, concentrations greater than 50 parts per million, except in the top layer, correct?
You're not leaving 50, you're removing 50. So you'd be leaving anything less than 50.
I'm sorry,
beneath 2 feet.
I said that wrong. Yeah, thank you. And the 2 alternatives that you put on your first page are 5, a variation on 5, and a variation on 3.
It's actually a variation on 3. That's the grass alternative. And then artificial turf is, yes, it's kind of 5. It's essentially a 1 foot cut, but we wouldn't be chasing, hopefully wouldn't be chasing PCBs below 10.
So they're not really comparable, right?
They're similar from the perspective of the overall amount of soil to be removed from the site. The numbers are comparable, but the restoration costs, so remediation alternative number 5 that you see on your slide right here does not include the costs for restoring with artificial turf.
The reason I ask is I'd like to see comparable plans that are a 1 foot cut and a 2 foot cut. And I'd like to see those plans both have less down to 10 parts per million. I personally, I don't think I would support a 50 parts per million plan. I'm not, we're only going to do this once. and hopefully we'll never do it again. And I don't want to chase cheap here. I think there's a security in the community. I also don't, I'm not confident about the risk. As you said, you're not a biologist on this or a chemist on this. I would just like to see those. I'd like to see comparables. Grass and turf. To me, that's not really the central issue, grass and turf. But I get it. We need to look at grass and turf. I'd like to see 1 and 2 at and the maybe you have them here. You said you picked the middle number in cost effectiveness, and then these are both grass. So then you add 2.5 million to those. Is that right?
Well, alternative number 5, if you look at that number,
Yeah.
for cleanup costs,
Right.
it's 5.7 to 8 million.
Pick the middle.
Those costs assume a grass restoration.
Correct.
If you want to assume you're installing a turf, high level, we assume is about $2.2 million on top.
Okay. And you do the same thing to 3, right?
3, if you're doing a 2-foot cut, yes, it'd be similar to what I just explained.
Because one's a 1 foot, one's a 2 foot, right?
Right.
Okay. Okay.
All right, Ms. Hirsch.
I know we were just talking about obviously the parts per million and so forth, but I would also like to talk about the impact to the students when we're removing the soil, for instance, the construction, the noise, disruption to their student learning, as well as their health risks. I know we talked about it a little bit at the last meeting that we discussed this at, what goes out into the air when we're pulling out the dirt, as well as, I know you discussed community acceptance and the least amount of community impact. Can you discuss just the difference between some of these plans as to how that would impact the surrounding community of homeowners, as well as the students' health and ability to access their learning while this construction project's going on?
Yeah, I can give that a shot. So, you're essentially, during construction, your potential issues for exposure to students or the surrounding public are truck idling and traffic for the trucks that are taking away or bringing back in soil. So one of the focus for the construction companies are making sure that the trucks are not on and idling when if they're waiting to be either drop off or pick up soil. It's to clean the tires and make sure the truck tarps on the trucks are closed when they're leaving and entering the site. As part of that, and associated with on-site work, dust generation is one of the primary things we're looking out for to mitigate. So you're having active water trucks spray dirt while it's either if it's excavated or stockpiled, you're applying water to mitigate dust from entering the breathable zones. You're also covering stockpiles with tarps when they're not being added to or removed from. All these things are prevalent regardless of the remedial alternative. The main difference between them is the amount of time trucks are going to be idling or stockpiles and soils are going to be moved during each one of these elements. So it's more of an impact on the community for the longer each of the alternatives takes.
Okay, I just wanted to just make it clear, because I know we talked about it a little bit about the last time, is the impact to the students, their health, as well as their education, as well as the community overall. And I know that I think that was partially why I think you had aimed towards number 5 when we were talking about the remedial alternatives last time. Just out of curiosity, for the high schools, for field 6 and 7, do you happen to know, are they at 50, parts per million or 10 parts per million with their remedial plan?
So again, not ours, but based on my understanding, they are simply doing 1 foot and 2 foot cuts, not chasing impacts at depth. So the 10 plus PCBs to 50 plus PCBs 10 ppm. As of right now, based on where they are currently remediating, I know there's still some elements of those fields that have not been addressed with a RAP remediation plan. But based on what was just approved, it was just 1 foot, 2 foot, based on the cover of the site.
Okay, so it's pretty similar to what we're looking at here, though.
Yeah, if we want to be directly applicable, again, sites are different, and we would need to sit down with the state and make sure they're in agreement. But it's essentially, if you want to be directly comparable to what the high school just got approved, you're essentially removing the plus PCB removal at each one of these alternatives. So number 3 and 4 would be identical at the high school based on what they just got approved. They were not asked to chase impacts at depth.
Yeah, but we need to know the difference between the sites. I mean, we can't have it both ways.
Peter, just hang on. We'll get to you. We got another hand in front of you. All right, Ms. Kowalski.
Sure, thanks. So I have two questions. So the first question is, what is the difference that we see in reduction of risk of exposure when it's quote unquote capped? And are we using the term capped, meaning we're putting turf on the field versus grass? Or how, well, I guess preliminarily, what do we mean by the term capped?
Yeah, so cap can take on different definitions. A cap can be a clean soil cap. Default regulations in the state require a 4-foot soil, clean soil, to prevent exposure to underlying impacts. We would be requesting, let's say we go with number 2 or the 3 or 4 rather, where we're doing a 2-foot cover or a 2-foot cut and replace with 2-foot clean. Because we're not meeting the default 4-foot cut required by the state, we would need a variance to that requirement. So we would be adding only 2 feet of clean. So in that situation, your cap would be 2 feet of clean soil. If the alternative is to go with turf, then your cap is pretty similar, but is actually a series of different intervals. Your cap would be a stone layer plus a geogrid plus the turf itself. In total, it'd probably be a foot, maybe a little bit more than that, probably more than a foot. For your drainage layers, but in that situation, that would be your cap. The cap could also be a vapor barrier, but we're not contemplating that here because vapor intrusions on issues, no buildings above the athletic fields. But the caps can change based on different site or remedial strategy.
Okay, so do we see a difference in an increased or a decreased risk of exposure when we're capping it with a turf cap versus a grass cap?
So it's a good question. Depending on who you ask at the regulatory departments, EPA and Connecticut DEP, PCB division, based on our understanding working with those guys, they feel a turf cap is more protective because it's less likely for a student to dig into the ground and potentially be exposed to those soils. They would need to dig pretty deep to get there, but
like how deep? Like we're not talking a divot when they get their cleat turned up and they, do a hard turn when they're playing football.
No,
or
they would have
soccer.
to dig. Let's say we do turf, they'd have to dig at least 1 foot through the turf, through the geogrid, through the drainage layer, through the stone to get to the underlying fill.
Okay, got it. And then the next question I have is, we refer to this as with a long-term cap and inspection and maintenance. Can you provide a little color to that as what you mean by that inspection and maintenance and what that turns into, annual costs?
Yeah, the cost would be very minimal unless you see a problem. You're essentially visually walking the entire site, making sure that there's no compromised areas of the turf or the grass. If there has been any excavation activities that's has been done to the knowledge of the school officials, you want to know that right away. But yeah, it starts with visual, and if there's issues, it gets more comprehensive from a mitigation perspective. But that's what we mean by long-term cap inspection and maintenance. You're trying to make sure that
the cap hasn't been penetrated, right? You're looking to make sure that no one is digging that 1 foot below to somehow have PCBs flying into the air. Okay.
Ryan, this is Peter Bernstein, and I just want to go back to something you said about Greenwich High School, and I want to confirm this. So I think you said there were some spots where they took out 1 and some spots where they took out 2 feet. So for the 1 foot, I presume that was turf, and then the grass area I think was on along the sidelines. That was 2 feet. Is that right?
So I think that was proposed. I don't think they've done it yet, Peter. I can try to get back to you. I can try to talk to AECOM and their I'm afraid the name is escaping me. Direct public.
It's Amy.
Yeah, Amy. Sorry, to see kind
Amy
of where they
Siebert.
where they are with that. But yeah, my understanding was yes, they proposed 1 foot cuts in turf areas and 2 foot cuts in grass areas.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any more hands. Board members, if you have suggestions, questions, I would say reach out to Tony with them. We would plan to take this up as an action item at our next meeting. So please do submit your questions. 1 second, Peter. Members of the public, obviously, you can email the board with your thoughts. Mr. Scher.
Ryan, could you, when you speak to whoever you speak to at AECOM, I mean, I'm lost in this conversation, and it's because, you know, we were operating on the theory that Greenwich High School was going down a regulatory path, and we were waiting for their approval, or that's the way Dr. Jones originally presented this, and that we would mirror off of what they're doing. But now we're talking about plans that are different. And the second thing is, I heard you say, well, you have to understand these sites are different. Unfortunately, I think it puts us in the position where we need to understand what those differences are. I also know that, you know, being in these schools, Greenwich High School is in a low-lying area, and this field at Western is elevated. You know, so there's probably some differences here. When you come back, could you be sure and present to us, not, you know, don't turn it into a science project, please, but so we can, I'd like to understand the differences between the 2 sites and the differences between the approvals, to understand the applicability of this. Is, you know, we're policymakers, so although we'd like to just deal with things one at a time, you inadvertently wind up setting policy by the decisions that you make. So this information is important. Can you do that?
Yeah, Peter, let me real quick, again, like you said, not making a science experience out of it, but yeah, they are different from the sense that our groundwater beneath Western Middle School is, fortunately, granted it's only based on 1 round of sampling at 4 monitoring wells, is not impacted.
Correct.
I would again say that AECOM is working on the high school and Langen's working on the Western Middle School, so I would want to defer to AECOM to speak specifically of the high school. But our understanding about the high school is they also had to do ecological risk assessments. We have yet to be asked to do that at the Western Middle School. We don't really have the environment, a stream running through our site where there's media for nesting and foraging animals to be potentially impacted here. It's an athletic field. It's not a stream or a wetlands. So from that sense, they're also different. So they're similar from the sense that there's impacted fill and their students, but they're different from the sense of, you know, what media is impacted and, you know, what the strategies are. I think we're hopeful that strategies will be similar, Peter. And I can, if you want, I can try to go into a little bit more detail next time we meet about what those potential differences are. But essentially, we won't fully understand the roadmap for the Western Middle School until we're enrolled into the voluntary mediation program, and once we meet with the stakeholders at the EPA and DEP, and they can help guide us and help us understand what they're going to be looking for to get this remediation approved at the Western Middle School.
Ryan, one other question. The cap that is natural turf, can you just review the layers again and their depth?
So if it's natural grass, it's only 1 full layer of clean fill. So that can serve, what that is depends on the availability of materials when this project takes place. It could be 2 feet of stone and 2 feet of topsoil. It could be 3 feet of stone and 1 foot of topsoil. I think that decision, as long as it's a protective barrier and it's clean, as long as you have that separation, it's protective.
I'm sorry, I didn't ask you the correct question. If you were going to have a 1 foot quote fill, right? So there's grass at the top, right? And that probably goes down. It's put in topsoil, right? And then there's something underneath that, and then there's something underneath that, and then there's the original dirt, correct? Or something like that.
You talking about for natural grass or for artificial grass?
Or natural grass.
For natural grass, if we're doing a 1 foot cut, which we're not actually recommending, and we don't think it would be approved at the Western Middle School or the high school.
Okay.
If it's going to be a 1 foot cut, it's probably going to have to be a turf, just based on the feedback we received to date. So we think the shallowest cut for natural grass would be 2 foot.
Okay.
That 2 feet as long as it's clean, it could be stone, it could be quarry stone, it could be pea stone, it could be clean fill with just a 3-inch layer of topsoil. It could be more topsoil. It's really based on a cost and availability exercise when it comes time to doing the work. As long as if it's clean, the actual interstitial layers aren't of much impact on what the state or the EPA thinks is protective. But at the bare minimum, it's probably 3 inches of topsoil as your upper layer.
Ms. Stowe.
Just real fast, Tony, I assume that Gordon is trying to solicit, because it's hard to get public comment since we can't do that in a proper way given our pandemic. So I assume Gordon, whose emails I absolutely adore when friends forward them to me, is trying to solicit feedback from his school.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
That'll be sort of and so they'll hopefully email the board over the coming weeks with their thoughts.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
All right. With that, Ryan, thank you very much. We absolutely appreciate your time and patience with us while we work through our multitude of questions. I think that to one of us, we want to get this project done right and as quickly as possible to bring the fields back online. So we will probably take this up at our meeting next Thursday, the 21st. With that, could I get a motion, Mr. Kelly, to adjourn? Give you a second to unmute.
Yes, a motion to adjourn. I will make that motion.
And I'll happily second that. So roll call. It's Peter Bernstein. I'm a yes. Ms. Stowe?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Ms. Downey?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. Kowalski?
Yes.
Ms. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Scher?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for participating. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.